I've ridden by this place literally all of my life. I used to live just a few miles from here when I was a kid. And, of course, I was told the legend of this Indian mound many times growing up as we would ride by. The legend was a guy and a girl from competing tribes fell in love, but were forbidden to be together because of the bad blood between the two tribes. So they both leapt to their deaths off Yonah Mountain. The true story is actually much more fascinating to me, though. In the late 1800s, the owner of this land at the time, Captain John H. Nichols, found 3 Native American stone box grave sites just a few yards west of this mound while he was plowing his fields. In the box graves were multiple bodies and Native American artifacts, including the skeletal remains of a 6-foot-tall native buried alone with his personal belongings, including a copper axe. Shortly after this, Captain Nichols shaved 2 feet off the top of this mound, in which reportedly more bones were found, and he built this gazebo at the newly flattened top. Some see the gazebo as a slap in the face to Native Americans, to place it on top of a sacred burial site. This mound used to be nearly 20 feet high and more oval-shaped. Now it's not quite 15 feet high. Later, in May of 1915, the Hay Foundation and the Smithsonian got permission to excavate this mound, on the agreement that any precious metals found would be turned over to the landowner. At that time, the history and age of the Native Americans in this burial site were unknown, but it was known that the Cherokee and other native tribes had been finding gold in this area for many years, which of course led to the Trail of Tears in the early 1830s. It's likely the owner of the land only let the excavation happen because of his own curiosity about gold stashed within this burial mound. After the excavation, it was determined that people who built this mound predated the Georgia Gold Rush by at least 500 years, though, and predated Cherokee. So, there were no secret gold artifacts to be found. The site was excavated for 4 months, and then the excavation was halted because of weather and scheduling issues. So, many other bodies may still be there. Look at the copper armbands on this warrior. The remains of 75 natives were discovered, adults, teens, and a few children, the smallest being only 22 inches tall, as well as many artifacts such as clay pottery, effigies, clay pipes, conch shells, oyster shells, and pearls with holes through them. Some were found up around the skull, which probably means they were worn as earrings, as well as clay ear pins for stretching piercings, copper armbands, copper and lead buttons, blue and also white glass beads, and striped glass beads, quartz crystal, bear teeth, flint, arrowheads, and other weapons, including stone and copper axes, and slate knives. And mats woven from cane that grows naturally along the Chattahoochee River. as well as evidence of many fire pits. Here is a photo showing the copper axe and a conch shell used for dipping water. The composition of the copper in this axe was traced to ore from the Keweenaw Peninsula in Michigan, and the conch and oyster shells are from either the Atlantic coast or the Gulf Coast, showing physical evidence of long-distance trading with other tribes. Somehow, a copper axe made it 900 miles from Upper Michigan to the Nacoochee Valley of Georgia, 800 years ago. A little mind-boggling. It wasn't shipped by UPS. This amazing piece of pottery from the mound is on display at the Sautee Nacoochee Center, less than a mile from the mound it was dug up from. Ironically, on loan from the Smithsonian. The site also contained the burial of a canine, believed to be a fox, possibly indicating this was a pet. Though the excavation seems to have been very professionally done, given the date of 1915, there were some random reckless events over the 4 months of digging, such as kids visiting the archaeological site at night and accidentally caving in a grave site, breaking a perfect clay effigy. Also, a section of the excavation was caved in because of a heavy rain during the 4-month dig. Though archaeological technology and techniques are much better today, it may be best that this site was excavated back then in 1915. Apparently, many of the bones were highly decomposed and fell to dust or putty when exposed. There may have been much less for archaeologists to study today. The ground around the Chattahoochee River is very moist. But on the other hand, modern technology would surely give us a better idea of the causes of death and whether these indigenous people suffered from many of the same diseases that affect us today. DNA testing to trace heredity and health issues, toxicity or contamination of bone material, etc. This site had been used for burials and ceremonies for many, many years and was built up in layers over time. Artifacts found on only the top 4 feet of this mound showed signs of European influence. A Spanish coin dated 1808 was found in the surface soil of this mound. It had a small hole in it like it was used as a pendant, so most likely was lost there by a local settler later in the 1800s. What's weird, and a good example that human nature's natural choice is to choose fantasy and legend over fact? The fact is, the truth and details of this site have been available since 1915 or so. But locals still prefer to share the legend of the 2 Indian lovebirds who leapt from Yonah Mountain to be together eternally. This was the story I heard in the late 1960s when I was a 4-year-old kid, more than 50 years after the site was formally studied. I don't know how I feel about the gazebo. A very European-style sitting space being put right on top of a known Native American burial mound. Was Captain Nichols basically just peeing on his territory by putting the gazebo here? I guess, though, if he truly wanted to be disrespectful of the burial mound and to Native American people, he could have just plowed it down and had more room to plant his corn here. Also, some say he put the gazebo on top to prevent others from robbing the gravesite. Who knows? I also don't know how I feel about the burial mound being excavated, basically dug up by archaeologists. Can you imagine the uproar if someone put a huge teepee on top of an old white man's graveyard? Or the uproar if archaeologists decided to dig these old graves up? But Egyptian tombs are being studied, Early European sites are being excavated and studied, and new information is being learned and is changing what we thought we knew about early human history. Truth and facts are replacing legends, early propaganda, and primitive beliefs. I have to admit, I am fascinated to know the details learned from the excavation of this mound, to see how these Native Americans lived, and to see the art and the tools they created, things they traded with other natives and used in their lives. And the gazebo on top does draw attention to the burial mound. Thousands and thousands of people ride by this site every year, and they remember the gazebo. And with that, they learn something about the natives, the real locals that once lived on this land. Education is good.